This is my true story. After everything I gave my daughter, the house, the education, the love, the life, one night at dinner, she looked me in the eye and said, "You're too old to matter." Just like that. Like I was some dusty book she was tired of reading. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I just nodded and finished my meal. But the next morning, I did something she never saw coming. Before I tell you what I did, please tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there. And subscribe to this channel if you care about stories like mine. I worked for 45 years straight, never took a break, not for holidays, not for myself, not even when I was sick. I started out sweeping floors at a factory, then worked my way up to supervisor, then manager. I wasn't a rich man, but I was proud. I built everything I had with these two hands. The house I lived in? I laid the bricks myself. Took me 3 years to finish, one paycheck at a time. I didn't go on vacations. I didn't waste money on luxuries. I saved, I planned, and I provided. Every corner of that home had meaning. I remember painting the front door blue because my daughter once said it reminded her of the ocean, even though we had never seen it. I planted trees in the yard so she'd have shade when she played. I patched up broken fences, even when my back hurt. That house wasn't just where we lived. It was where I poured every bit of my life and love. When my daughter was born, I was 29. Her mother and I separated when she was young. It wasn't a happy marriage, and she left without saying much. After that, I raised my daughter alone. She was everything to me, my whole world. I learned how to braid her hair from a library book. I walked her to school every day, even when it rained. I packed her lunch with little notes just so she'd feel seen. On weekends, I'd take her to the park and let her ride the swings while I sat on the bench, tired from work, but still smiling. Every milestone she hit, her first steps, her first words, her first broken heart, I was there. Not just physically, but emotionally. I held her when she cried. I stayed up when she was sick. I worked overtime so she could go on school trips like the other kids. When she got older, I made sure she had everything she needed. I worked nights to afford her university. I even sold my truck, my only one, to help her buy her first car. When she got married, I paid for the wedding. I didn't tell anyone how much I had to borrow. I didn't want her to feel the weight of the cost. I just wanted her to feel celebrated. After her divorce, when she was struggling with bills, I helped her again. Gave her money quietly, never once asking for it back. I even helped with her mortgage, just so she wouldn't lose the roof over her children's heads. I thought I was raising someone who would always know I had her back. I thought she'd remember. I thought love was something you pass down, and it multiplies. For most of my life, I believed the bond between a father and daughter was unbreakable. I thought no matter how life changed, no matter who came and went, that kind of love would remain. That's why I never prepared myself for betrayal. I never even imagined it. I thought all the years I gave her would mean something. I thought when I got older and slower, she'd sit beside me like I once sat beside her. That she'd bring soup when I coughed, or check my blood pressure like I used to check her temperature with the back of my hand. I thought I'd grow old with respect, with dignity, with love. But instead, I was treated like a leftover, a burden, a ghost in my own story. She used to hold my hand when she crossed the street. Now she barely looked me in the eyes. She used to cry if I scraped my knee. Now she sighed if I needed help getting out of a chair. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe I made it too easy. I never asked for much. I stayed quiet, even when I should have spoken up. I believed silence was love, that if I just kept giving, eventually she'd give back. But that day, the day she said I didn't matter, that's when I realized, maybe I raised her with too much comfort and not enough consequence. But before that moment, all I ever did was give. I gave my youth. I gave my time. I gave my money. I gave my whole life to her. Everything I owned, Everything I built, it was all for her future. I had a will with her name on it. Every account, every key, every asset had her in mind. Because I thought she'd be the one to carry my story forward. I thought I was handing over a legacy. I didn't realize I was handing it to someone who would one day look at me and say, "You're too old to matter." Getting old wasn't something I feared. I always thought it would be peaceful. Slower mornings, softer evenings, maybe a cup of tea in the garden and stories by the fire. I pictured my old age with laughter, visits from grandkids, and warm hugs after dinner. I never imagined it would feel like fading into the background of a life I once built. The truth is, aging doesn't happen all at once. It creeps up on you. One day, you're climbing ladders and fixing roofs. The next, you're standing at the bottom of the stairs, wondering if your knees will carry you. My memory started to slip, not in big, dramatic ways, but in small details, names, dates, where I left my glasses. I walked a bit slower, tired more easily. My hands, once strong and steady, began to tremble when I held a pen. Still, I didn't complain. I didn't want pity. I just wanted to be treated like I still mattered. After a minor surgery on my hip, I couldn't live alone for a few weeks. My doctor recommended I stay with someone until I fully recovered. My daughter offered. She said, "Come stay with us, Dad. We'll take care of you." And I believed her. I packed a small suitcase with only what I needed: pajamas, slippers, a few photos, and my reading glasses. I even brought a book I'd been meaning to finish, thinking I'd have quiet evenings in a room of my own. I left my house behind, still standing, still mine, still filled with the echoes of a life I was proud of. I locked the door carefully, like I always did. I didn't know then that it would be the last time I'd do it. At first, things were okay. She gave me the guest room, made me soup, reminded her kids to say hi to Grandpa. But something was off. I could feel it, even if I didn't want to admit it. Her smiles felt forced. Her voice had a tightness in it, like she was always holding back frustration. I tried to be easy. I stayed in my room, read my book, didn't make noise. I only asked for help when absolutely necessary. Still, every time I asked her for something, a cup of tea, help with my pills, a trip to the doctor, she'd sigh. Not loudly. Just enough for me to hear. Just enough to remind me I was taking up space. I started to notice more things. Her husband barely looked at me. The grandkids were kind, but confused, like they didn't know what to say to someone like me. One night, I overheard them whispering outside my door. My daughter said, "He's just old, okay? He doesn't even know what's going on half the time." That sentence stung. I wanted to open the door, to say, "I'm right here. I hear everything." But I didn't. I just sat there, staring at my slippers on the carpet, feeling like I was shrinking. Days passed, then weeks. My body healed faster than I expected, but I didn't mention it. I wasn't ready to leave, not because I couldn't, but because I wanted to believe she wanted me there, that I was welcome, that this wasn't just an obligation. I helped where I could, folded laundry, wiped the table after dinner, even tried teaching the kids how to play chess. I wanted to be useful, to remind her that I still had value, that I wasn't just some fragile figure in the corner of her life. But every time I tried to connect, she pulled away. She'd laugh at my old stories, tell the kids not to take me seriously. "Grandpa gets confused," she'd say, even when I was telling a clear memory. Sometimes I'd be in the middle of a sentence, and she'd cut me off or change the topic. It was like I didn't exist, like I was background noise in my own daughter's life. Still, I stayed quiet. I didn't want to start an argument. I didn't want to be that difficult parent. I told myself it was just stress, that she had work, kids, a marriage. Maybe she just needed time. But deep down, I felt it. I was no longer a father in her eyes. I was an inconvenience, a shadow, a reminder of a man she once needed but no longer cared for. And that hurt more than any ache in my bones. It hurt in a way I can't explain, like watching a candle flicker out and realizing no one noticed it was ever lit. It started with little things, small moments that didn't scream disrespect, but whispered it quietly, over and over, until it became impossible to ignore. I would ask her gently if she could warm my tea again, and she'd sigh like I'd asked her to climb a mountain. Once, I asked her if she could remind me of my next doctor's appointment, and she said, "Can't you remember anything on your own anymore?" with a roll of her eyes. I laughed it off at the time, trying to make it light, but inside, it chipped away at something tender. I wasn't looking for pity. I wasn't asking for the world. I just wanted kindness. I wanted the kind of patience I had given her every day of her life. When she cried over scraped knees, when she slammed doors during her teenage storms, when she called me crying the night before her wedding, doubting everything. I was there for every single one of those moments. Never once did I sigh. Never once did I treat her like a burden. And yet, here I was, in the home I helped her buy, made to feel like I didn't belong. She would mock my stories, not playfully, but in a way that stung. One day, I was trying to tell her kids about the time she won a spelling bee in 4th grade. I thought it would make them smile, make her proud. Instead, she interrupted me with a smirk, saying, "Here we go again. Grandpa's reruns." The kids laughed, but not because it was funny. They laughed because she told them to, because they were learning from her that my words didn't matter, that I didn't matter. That evening, I sat alone in the guest room, staring at the family photo on the wall. There we were, her mother, me, smiling like we had it all. I wondered when that photo stopped being real for her. I wondered when I stopped being a father and became just an old man taking up space. Another time, I tried to show her youngest how to whittle a small wooden figure, something I used to do with her when she was a child. She looked up from her phone just long enough to say, "Dad, please don't give him a knife. He's 7. I wasn't going to give him a knife. I was going to let him watch, teach him patience, teach him craft. But she didn't care to listen. She had already decided I was incapable, useless, a problem to manage, not a person to respect. The worst moments, though, came when I wasn't being mocked, but ignored. I would enter the room, and they wouldn't even glance up. I would try to add something to the conversation at dinner, and she would talk over me. Or worse, change the subject entirely. Her husband never spoke to me unless it was necessary. And when he did, it was with the same tone you'd use to speak to a stranger you don't trust. One night, I overheard her telling a friend on the phone, "It's like having another child in the house, except this one doesn't get better." I stood in the hallway, hearing every word. That sentence sat with me like a stone in my chest. Heavy, cold, unmovable. I wanted to knock on her door and remind her who I was, that I raised her, clothed her, protected her, sacrificed for her, that I stayed up nights worrying about her when she was sick, when she didn't come home, when she was heartbroken, that I gave her everything, not for praise, not for repayment, but because I loved her. But none of that seemed to matter now. In her eyes, I was just a liability, a nuisance, something to tolerate until she could find a way to be rid of me. The guest room began to feel more like a storage closet than a place of rest. My things were moved without asking. My books were boxed. My chair was shifted to make space for laundry baskets. One day, I came back from a short walk and found one of my photo albums on the floor, open, with footprints on the pages. No one apologized. No one even acknowledged it. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just being disrespected. I was being erased, slowly, quietly, without anyone saying a word. And the saddest part? I let it happen. I let it happen because I didn't want to make things worse. Because I thought maybe, if I stayed kind, if I stayed useful, she would remember who I was. Remember that I mattered. But every day, she proved otherwise. Every word, every sigh, every dismissive gesture was another nail in a silent coffin where the father she once loved was buried, alive, and still hoping for something that would never come. It happened on a quiet Sunday evening, the kind that should have felt warm and familiar, the smell of dinner in the air, the sound of children laughing, the comfort of being surrounded by family. But instead, there was a strange tension hanging above the table that I couldn't quite explain. We were all seated for dinner, her husband at the end, the kids on either side, and me in my usual spot, the seat closest to the hallway, as if I was always halfway out the door. I had been quiet all day, keeping to myself, staying out of everyone's way like usual. But something about that evening made me want to say something. Maybe it was the way her daughter reminded me of her when she was small, the same curious eyes, the same stubborn smile. Maybe it was the ache in my chest that had been growing heavier with each passing day. I looked around the table, remembering how I used to cook for her every Sunday, her favorite potato stew, the songs we'd hum in the kitchen. Back then, she'd tug at my sleeve and say, "Tell me about when you were little, Dad." And I'd tell her stories for hours. She used to hang on to every word. So I tried. Just one story. Just one memory. I smiled softly and said, "You know, when you were 8, you once cried because your science project broke on the way to school. I remember I stayed up all night fixing it with glue and string. You won first place." I paused, hoping she'd smile, hoping something would flicker behind her eyes, even a trace of gratitude, of warmth. But what I saw instead made my stomach sink. She didn't smile. She didn't even look at me. She set her fork down sharply, leaned back in her chair and said, cold, flat, emotionless, "You're too old to matter. Just stop talking." That was it. No laugh, no apology. No one at the table said a word. Her husband looked away. The kids looked at their plates. For a few seconds, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. I stared at her, not because I was angry, but because I genuinely couldn't believe what I had just heard. It wasn't just the sentence. It was the tone. Like I was some buzzing fly she was too tired to swat. Like my voice was a waste of space in her perfect little dinner. And maybe worst of all, no one defended me. Not even her youngest, the one I had helped learn to ride a bike just a few weeks ago. The silence told me everything. I didn't matter here, not to her, not to them, not anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I simply nodded, quietly finished my meal. Every bite tasted like ash. I kept my hands steady, even though they trembled beneath the table. I looked down at my plate, cutting the chicken into small, pointless pieces, not even tasting them. I felt like a ghost, a presence in a house that no longer remembered it once needed me. After dinner, I stood up, pushed in my chair, and walked back to the guest room. I didn't say goodnight. No one stopped me. I closed the door behind me, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the wall. Not thinking, not blinking, just sitting there, absorbing what had happened. That sentence echoed in my ears. "You're too old to matter." Over and over, like a drip from a leaking ceiling you can't fix. I looked at my suitcase in the corner, the same one I'd packed months ago, thinking I was just staying for a few weeks. I had never unpacked fully. Maybe part of me always knew this wasn't home. I opened the drawer next to the bed and took out the folded paper I had kept there for years. My will. The original one. The one where her name sat proudly as the primary beneficiary. The daughter I had trusted more than anyone. The one I thought would carry my memory with love and honor. My hands didn't shake as I stared at it. They were steady, calm, like they had finally accepted something the heart had refused to see for too long. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel vengeance. I felt something heavier, like watching a ship you built with your own hands drift away while you stand on shore, knowing it won't ever return. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat there, watching the shadows move across the walls, listening to the occasional creak of the floor outside my door. I thought about my wife, how she would have handled this. She was always the stronger one, the fire in our home. I wished I could ask her what to do, but I already knew. Some lines, once crossed, don't lead back. Some words once spoken can't be forgiven. She didn't just disrespect me, she erased me. She declared I had no value, no worth, that my voice, my love, my existence didn't matter. And if I didn't matter to her, then she no longer deserved to be the one I left anything behind for. That's when the decision was made. Quietly, without anger, but with finality. I folded the will, placed it in my lap, and stared out the window as the sky shifted from dark blue to the pale light of dawn. Tomorrow, I would make the call. And nothing, not even her apologies, would change my mind. That morning, I didn't eat breakfast. I sat by the window and watched the sunrise instead. The light spilled slowly over the trees, turning the sky from dull gray to soft orange. Birds chirped like any other morning, but I felt like something inside me had ended in the night. I didn't feel like a father anymore. Not to her. I had spent most of the night sitting upright, fully awake, with my old will still in my lap, unfolding and folding it again, like it was a piece of paper I no longer recognized. My name was still there, but beside mine was hers. The daughter who told me, with no hesitation, that I was too old to matter. A daughter who had forgotten every night I stayed up with her fever. Every broken appliance I fixed. Every time I said yes when I wanted to say no. Every bill I quietly paid when her marriage was falling apart. And even after all of that, I still helped her. Moved in after my surgery, not because I wanted to, but because she said, "Come stay with us, we'll take care of you." I believed her, like a fool. Sitting there that morning, I realized I had one thing left that she didn't know about: my voice. Not the one she silenced at dinner, but the one that still had the power to write her out of my legacy. I got up slowly. My knees ached like they always do, but I didn't wince. I was beyond pain at this point. I pulled on my cardigan, picked up my cane, and looked in the mirror. I looked old, yes. Tired, yes. But not broken. I still had dignity, and it was time I started protecting it again. I reached into the drawer one more time, took the will, and placed it in a small file folder I kept labeled "Important." It held a few old tax documents, my birth certificate, and the contact card of my lawyer, Mr. Carlson. He'd handled my affairs since my wife died. Honest man. I trusted him. I hadn't spoken to him in almost 2 years, but he'd always said, "Call me if anything ever changes." This was the change. I picked up my old flip phone and dialed the number. It rang 3 times. Then a familiar voice answered, warm and respectful. "Carlson Law Office," he said. I cleared my throat. "James Hill here," I said. "I'd like to update my will." There was a short pause. Then his voice lit up. "Mr. Hill, of course. When can you come in?" I told him today. He said he'd make time. I thanked him, hung up, and put the phone down gently. I stood there for a moment, the silence of the room pressing against me. My daughter was already gone for the day, school drop-off, yoga, whatever her routine was. She hadn't said good morning. Maybe she was still upset about me ruining the vibe at dinner. Or maybe she just didn't care anymore. Either way, I was glad not to face her. I wasn't ready to pretend everything was okay. Not today. I gathered my things carefully. The will, my coat, my folder. I checked twice that I had my wallet. Then I walked out the door and down the sidewalk, every step slow but steady. The autumn air hit me like a soft slap, cool and sharp. Leaves crunched under my shoes. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. I think that's when it really sank in. I was invisible here, but not everywhere. Not in the world I had built. Not in the life I had worked so hard for. I took the bus downtown, sat by the window like I always used to, watched people on the street, watched young men laughing on corners, mothers pulling children along by the hand, people in suits glued to their phones. And I thought, every one of them has someone waiting for them, listening to them, caring. I used to be that person, and now I'm not, but I still exist. I'm still here. Mr. Carlson's office hadn't changed. Same wooden door, same polite secretary. She offered me coffee. I declined, too jittery. He saw me within 5 minutes, warm handshake, asked how I'd been. I didn't lie. I said, "Not great." Then I took out the folder, placed it on his desk, and said, "It's time to remove my daughter's name. She doesn't respect me anymore. I want someone who does." He didn't pry, didn't ask me to explain. He just nodded and said, "We'll get it done today." I spent the next hour signing papers, reviewing old files, answering questions. He asked who I wanted to name instead. I paused, thinking. Then I smiled. My childhood friend had passed away years ago, but his son, Andrew, had always stayed in touch. Visited me every Christmas, called me on birthdays, took me fishing once, just because. He once told me, "You're like the grandfather I never had." That meant something. That stuck. I told Mr. Carlson to add Andrew's name to everything, the house, the savings, even my old coin collection. He deserved it. Not because he asked, but because he saw me. As I signed the last form, something in me softened. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't triumph. It was peace. Like putting down a heavy box you've carried too long. I left the office feeling lighter. Like I had taken back something that was stolen. Not by theft, but by disrespect. I went home that evening like nothing had changed. My daughter didn't ask where I had been. I didn't offer an answer. We barely spoke at all. She assumed I was still just her aging burden, but I wasn't. I was done being her silent shadow. I had already erased her. Not out of rage, but because she made it clear I no longer mattered. And if I didn't matter to her, then she shouldn't matter in my will. It was that simple. The next morning, everything looked the same. The same kitchen sounds, the same clatter of her making coffee without offering me a cup, the same silence between us like a wall we'd both stopped trying to climb. But something had shifted, even if she didn't know it yet. I sat at the table, slowly buttering a slice of toast while she scrolled through her phone, laughing at something on the screen. Maybe a meme, maybe a message from one of her friends. But she didn't look up once. She didn't ask if I'd slept well. She didn't ask if I needed anything. And I didn't say a word either. I had already done what needed to be done. While she lived in this comfortable rhythm of assuming I would always be there, quiet, compliant, forgotten, I had already removed her from my life in the most permanent way I could. The will had been changed. The accounts adjusted. The trust fund I had built over the years, every penny saved from birthdays I didn't spend, vacations I never took, meals I skipped just to stretch the budget, was no longer hers. It now belonged to Andrew, the boy who used to visit me every Sunday afternoon, sit with me for hours, just talking about nothing and everything. He once helped me fix a broken garden fence when no one else showed up. When I broke my wrist years ago, he was the one who took me to the hospital and stayed the night just to make sure I was okay. He never called me a burden, never once acted like my age made me a waste of space. That morning, I felt oddly proud. I didn't need to raise my voice or slam any doors. I didn't need to confront her or demand apologies. I had done something stronger. I had erased her without chaos. My silence was my power now. I kept a copy of the new will tucked into a folder in my room, right under a photo of my late wife. She would have been heartbroken to see how things turned out, but I think she would have agreed with me. She always believed respect wasn't owed. It was earned and returned. And when people stop giving it, they forfeit the right to receive anything more. That afternoon, while she left for errands, I walked slowly back to my room. Every step was painful. My knees were swollen and my back ached, but I moved with purpose. I opened my drawer, took out the old spare key, and slipped it into a small box. Alongside it, I placed a note. Not dramatic, not cruel. Just simple words. I changed everything. Not out of hate, but because you made me feel invisible. I didn't plan to show it yet. Maybe never. But it gave me comfort, knowing it was there. Like armor. She came home a few hours later, bags in hand, cheerful from shopping. Asked me if I'd eaten. Her tone was fake, like checking a box. I nodded and said yes. She moved on, not noticing anything. Not knowing the house she cooked in, the fridge she filled, the walls she took for granted. None of it belonged to her anymore. Not legally, not financially, not even sentimentally. I had taken back everything she assumed was hers, and I didn't need to announce it. That's the beauty of legal paperwork. It doesn't need noise. It only needs a signature. The rest takes care of itself. That evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sun set. A soft breeze brushed past me, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. Not over her, not over the past, but over how my story would end. I didn't want bitterness to write my final chapter. I wanted truth. I wanted dignity. And I had finally reclaimed it. The neighbors waved as they passed. I smiled back. They didn't know anything had changed. But inside, I felt like a different man. I had loved my daughter, raised her with everything I had, given her a home, a future, and my trust. But love without respect is just a quiet pain. And I was done carrying that pain alone. She would find out someday. Maybe when I'm gone. Maybe sooner. But when she did, she would have to sit with the truth. That she pushed me away not with one action, but with 1,000 small dismissals. And when I finally heard the sentence, "You're too old to matter," it was just the final nail. A phrase that stripped away the last bit of hope I held for us. The next few days passed like usual. She didn't notice the shift in my tone, the polite distance, the way I answered only when spoken to. She thought I was sulking, or tired, or just being old. That's the thing. When someone sees you as useless, they never realize when you become powerful again. I watched her move through the house like she owned it, paid no rent, bought no repairs, didn't know where the property taxes were stored. She thought inheritance meant automatic ownership. She didn't know the laws, didn't understand trusts. She never once asked how I set things up. And now, it was too late. I had already signed the future over to someone else. I didn't need her approval. I didn't need to explain myself, because she never explained her cruelty. She never apologized. And I wasn't waiting anymore. I slept better that night than I had in months. Not because everything was perfect, but because I finally felt like I mattered, to myself. I had made a decision that honored the man I used to be, the father, the worker, the one who showed up every day, even when it was hard. And I did it without shouting, without begging, without revenge in my heart. Just peace. That was enough. The days moved slow after that, but I didn't mind. I liked slow. I liked quiet. Silence had become my best friend. Not the heavy kind that makes you feel alone, but the peaceful kind. The kind that gives you time to think, to breathe, to just exist without proving anything. I didn't need to explain myself to her anymore. I didn't owe her a single sentence. Every conversation I had with her after that was short and soft. No arguments, no emotion, just polite words. Yes. No. I'm fine. She didn't notice at first, or maybe she did, and just didn't care. Maybe she thought old people don't feel things, that we just shrink into furniture, useful when needed, invisible when not. But I wasn't angry. I had already let the anger pass through me like a bad wind. What I felt now was something colder, calmer. I wasn't trying to punish her. I was just done giving her pieces of myself. My love, my stories, my memories, all of it stayed inside me now. And that, strangely, felt like power. She would ask, "Dad, did you eat?" And I'd nod. She would say, "Need anything from the store?" And I'd shake my head. But I didn't tell her when I called the movers. I didn't tell her when I called the assisted living place to confirm my spot. I didn't tell her when I sold some of my old tools to help pay for it all. She thought everything was normal, and in a way it was, just not in the way she thought. My plan was unfolding in silence, one day at a time. I started packing a few things, not too many, just photos, letters, and the book my wife used to read to our daughter when she was small. I didn't take the sweater my daughter bought me last Christmas. I didn't want anything that had her name on it. I was done with the pretending. One morning, she mentioned that her husband's parents might be moving in soon. She said it like I was some spare sock in a drawer she had to move around. I nodded. Didn't ask questions. Didn't protest. She assumed I would just disappear when the time came. She had no idea I already planned to. The best part of this whole plan wasn't the money or even the will. It was the silence, the complete absence of begging or explaining. She had taken so much from me, my dignity, my presence in her life, my role as a father. But she could never take my peace again. And now I held the one thing she never expected: distance. She couldn't touch me anymore because I was no longer emotionally reachable. I smiled more often, not because of her, but in spite of her. I found comfort in old habits: morning tea on the porch, listening to birds, reading crossword clues out loud to no one. I felt like myself again, the man I was before I gave too much, before I lowered my voice so hers could be louder, before I accepted crumbs and called it love. And still, I said nothing. Not when she rolled her eyes behind my back. Not when she sighed loudly when I asked where the tea bags were. Not when I overheard her tell someone, "He's just old. He doesn't even realize how much we do for him." I didn't answer that, because I did realize. I realized everything, and I wrote it down too. In a letter I kept folded in my jacket pocket. It was addressed to her, but I wasn't sure I'd ever give it to her. Some truths hurt more when spoken out loud, and some silences scream louder than any letter. Each day, I took one more step away from the version of me she thought she owned, and she still didn't see it. That's the thing about people like her. They only notice what you give, never what you take back. I started calling Andrew more often. We'd talk about the weather, his job, the tomatoes he was growing. He always asked if I was eating well, if I needed anything, not in a fake way. He actually listened. That's how you know who loves you. They listen when nothing's exciting. And with him, I didn't need silence. I could be myself. An old man with memories, wisdom, and stories worth telling. But with my daughter, silence was the only language left. It wasn't revenge, not really. It was self-respect. I wasn't going to shout or cry or ask her to understand me. I had done that already, for years. Now I was just quiet. The kind of quiet that made her uncomfortable maybe. But it gave me peace. I could feel her watching me sometimes, like she was trying to figure out what I was thinking. But she never asked, and I never told, because she stopped earning my thoughts the day she said I was too old to matter. That sentence hung in the air like smoke, still there, still choking. But I'd found my way to breathe again, quietly, firmly, on my terms. The day I left, the sun was soft, and the air smelled like old rain. I woke up early, even before the birds, and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. I didn't feel sad, just still. I looked around the room I had slept in for the last few months. Not a single photo of me on the walls, not one memory of who I had been. It was her house, not a home. I had once helped pay part of the down payment when she and her husband were struggling, but there was no sign of me here anymore. Just silence, cold walls, and a calendar on the fridge with no one circling my birthday. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't leave a note. I had already said everything in my silence. My small bag was packed. A couple of sweaters, my reading glasses, a book of poems, and the folded letter I'd written weeks ago. I placed it on the nightstand, just in case she ever came looking for meaning. Then I took off my house key, the one I'd been quietly carrying on my belt loop, and placed it next to the letter. I also left my wedding ring, not because I didn't love my wife anymore, but because the life we built didn't belong in this place. It deserved better energy than the one that lived in that house now. I stepped outside quietly. The car I'd arranged came right on time. The driver helped me in, and I gave one last look at the window upstairs. Her light was on. She was awake, but she never came down. Maybe she thought I was just going for a walk, or maybe she just didn't care anymore. Either way, I didn't wait. The road was quiet, no traffic. I rested my head on the window and watched the trees pass by. My mind wasn't racing. It was calm, like a still lake. The place I was going, the assisted living center, wasn't a sad place. It was actually quite beautiful. I had toured it secretly weeks ago. They had gardens, a small library, and a patio where old men played chess in the afternoons. When I visited, one of them waved and asked if I liked tomato soup. I said yes, and he smiled and said, "You'll do just fine here, friend." That felt more like home than anything I'd known in years. When we arrived, the staff greeted me kindly. No one rushed me. They called me by my name. Not Grandpa, not Old Man, just Mr. Carter. That felt nice. They helped me settle into my new room. It wasn't big, but it had a large window and a small shelf for my books. I placed my favorite photo of my wife on the table, the one where she's holding our daughter as a baby. Back when love was loud in our house. Back when no one thought I was too old to matter. I paid everything in full. No debt, no loans. Just clean dignity, bought with the savings I had hidden from everyone except my lawyer. The same lawyer who helped me rewrite the will. The same man who'd said, "Are you sure?" when I removed her name from everything. And I said, she was sure first when she said I didn't matter. My new place had quiet halls and the smell of fresh coffee in the morning. The nurse asked if I liked crossword puzzles. I told her I brought my own book. She laughed and said, "Then you'll fit right in." That night, as I unpacked, I imagined what was happening back at my daughter's house. Maybe she'd gone to my room and seen the empty bed. Maybe she saw the letter and the ring. Maybe she called my phone. But I wasn't answering anymore. I had already made peace with the goodbye she didn't realize she gave me long ago. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was just done being where I wasn't respected. The past would stay the past. But my future? It was mine again. That evening, I sat in the shared garden, surrounded by wind chimes and tall flowers. I felt free. Not young, not strong, but free. No one asked me to lower my voice. No one told me I was talking too much. I just existed. And for the first time in years, existing felt enough. I thought of my daughter, the small girl who used to braid my hair with ribbons and fall asleep on my chest. I missed that version of her. But the woman she became, the one who used my age as a weapon, she didn't deserve the rest of me. I didn't leave her out of hate. I left because I wanted peace. And I found it. In silence. In distance. In a quiet little room with a photo, a window, and no one telling me I didn't matter. The first few days after I moved, I kept expecting a knock, a phone call, some sign that she noticed I was gone. But nothing came. Not a word. Not a message. And deep down, I knew why. She didn't notice. She had grown so used to me being quiet, being small, being tucked away in that corner room like a forgotten coat, that even my absence felt normal to her. But then, on the fourth day, my phone buzzed. Her name lit up. I stared at it for a few seconds, then let it ring out. I didn't decline it. I didn't answer. I just watched it ring like it wasn't even mine. That phone rang 5 more times that day. I didn't pick up. What would I say? What could I say that would undo everything she'd done and everything I'd felt? A few days later, a staff member told me someone had come by asking for me. A woman, middle-aged, looked upset. I told them I didn't know who that was. I wasn't lying. I didn't recognize the woman she'd become. They said she asked to see my room. I told them I didn't want visitors. They respected that. They always respected what I wanted here. That was new. A week passed before another call came. This time, it was from her husband. Same last name. Same silence from me. Eventually, they stopped trying. That's when I knew she had read the letter. The one I left on the nightstand. She had found the ring, the key, and the paper with the truth. The truth that she had been removed. Not in anger, but in choice. I had chosen to take back my peace, to give the last of my life to people who remembered I was still alive. A friend at the home told me he saw her once more, standing outside the fence of the facility. She didn't come in. She didn't speak to anyone, just stood there for a few minutes and left. I think she wanted to see for herself that I was okay. Or maybe she hoped I'd run out to her like nothing had changed. But I didn't. I sat on the bench, just inside the window, watching the birds. I saw her, but I didn't move. It wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. If she had spoken to me that day, I don't know what I would have said. But silence was louder. Silence said everything. A few weeks later, I heard from my lawyer. He said she had tried to contest the will, tried to say I wasn't in my right mind, but the paperwork was solid. Dates were recent, signatures clean, witnesses present. Her case fell apart before it even reached court. She was shocked, furious, but she couldn't undo it. She had underestimated me, thought I was too old, too weak, too far gone to protect what little I had left. She was wrong. I had spent my whole life making sure my family had everything. And when the time came, I made sure to leave it with someone who remembered that, who remembered me. Her own kids, my grandkids, started asking questions. Why doesn't Grandpa live with us anymore? Why doesn't he call? Why did Aunt Linda get the money instead? She didn't have answers. Not honest ones anyway. But kids feel truth even when adults hide it. One day I got a letter. No return address. Just a shaky apology in 6 short lines. I'm sorry for what I said. I was tired. I didn't mean it. I miss you. Please come back. Love, your daughter. I read it once. Then I folded it up and placed it in my book of poems. Not to forget it, but to remember. Because memory doesn't always come from revenge. Sometimes it comes from knowing what lines should never have been crossed. You're too old to matter. That sentence echoed like thunder in my bones for weeks. Even now, it still whispers sometimes in my sleep. But I don't wake up angry. I wake up knowing I took the power back, with silence, with distance, and with the quiet decision to never be made small again. Peace, for me, didn't come with a celebration or applause. It came quietly, like a breeze through the curtains in the early morning. It came in the smell of fresh tomatoes growing in the little box garden I planted beside the window. It came in the rhythm of feeding the pigeons, watching how they remember the smallest acts of kindness. I didn't need noise. I had had a life full of noise. Jobs, traffic, family birthdays, arguments, laughter, doors opening and closing. Now, I wanted only the silence that heals. Every morning, I brewed a cup of tea and sat by the window in my little assisted living apartment. It wasn't a mansion, but it was mine, paid for with my own money. And it held no shadows of raised voices, no footsteps that mocked me, no air that felt heavy with judgment. I watched old black and white films in the evenings, the ones I used to love when I was young. And sometimes, when I felt strong enough, I wrote letters, not to send, just to write, to let out the words that never got said, the emotions I had held in for too long. I wrote to her once, a full letter, 4 pages. I told her I loved her once, loved her always, but that love did not mean I had to endure being erased. I never sent it. I tucked it into the drawer with my will, beside the documents, beside the silence. I still remember her as a little girl, hair tied in pigtails, running around the house with crayons, calling me Daddy, like it was the only name that mattered. I remember her falling asleep on my chest after bad dreams, her tiny fingers curled around my shirt. That version of her still lives in a small part of my heart, untouched by the years. But the woman she became, that person I had to let go of, not out of hate, but because the memory of love should not be poisoned by the present. Some people think removing someone from your life is cruel, but what they don't understand is, staying where you're unloved is even crueler. And when someone tells you that you don't matter anymore, you can't spend your days trying to prove that you do. You walk away, with your dignity, with your story, with your peace. That's what I did. And in the quiet of this new life, I found something deeper than forgiveness. I found stillness. I found mornings that didn't begin with tears, nights that ended with soft smiles. I made a friend down the hall, a woman named Ruth. She lost her son in a car crash, and we sometimes sit together and talk about the versions of our children we miss, the ones before the pain. We don't dwell, we just remember. I plant more tomatoes now. I read more poetry. Sometimes I get letters from my grandkids. They still care. They still remember. I write back, every time. I tell them stories, real ones, the kind their mother doesn't share. I don't speak ill of her. I just speak truth. And when they ask why things are the way they are, I tell them, sometimes people say things they can never take back. And sometimes people like me, we decide not to let those words define the rest of our days. I don't think I'll ever see her again. Not in person. Maybe one day, at a funeral, hers or mine. But if that day comes, I won't carry bitterness. Just distance. Just the choice I made to protect what little was left of me. They say you can't choose your family, but you can choose who gets the last part of you. I chose peace. I chose respect. And I chose to leave the world knowing I mattered, even if she couldn't see it. And if you've ever been told that you're too old to matter, let me tell you this. You do. You matter more than you think. And sometimes, walking away in silence is the loudest truth you'll ever speak.